Faith sat in the dim light of her lavish apartment, her eyes fixed on the screen of her phone, scrolling through Bola's Instagram with a growing sense of betrayal. Every picture of Bola and Jonathan laughing, living the life she thought should have been hers, fueled her rage. She felt a burning resentment, like a flame licking at her insides, promising to consume her if not unleashed. She knew she couldn't let this go. The resentment had festered into something dark, something that demanded action. With a determined sigh, she picked up her phone and dialed an old contact, her fingers trembling not from fear but from the anticipation of vengeance. "Lardy," she said, her voice low and venomous, "I need your help." There was a pause, then the familiar, gravelly laugh of Lardy, a man known in certain circles for his ability to manipulate and deceive. "Faith, it's been a while. What do you need?" "I want to ruin someone," Faith confessed, her words dripping with the venom of years of jealousy and scorn. Lardy chuckled, the sound echoing with both amusement and a warning. "That sort of thing comes with a price, Faith. Are you ready for what comes next?" Faith's eyes hardened, her resolve like steel. "I don't care about the consequences. I want Jonathan back, and I want Bola to suffer. I want her to feel every ounce of pain I felt." "All right," Lardy said, his voice taking on a businesslike tone. "We'll create a scandal so vile, so twisted, that Jonathan will have no choice but to leave Bola. But remember, once we start this, there's no turning back." "I understand," Faith replied, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of excitement. "Do it." The plan began to take shape in their minds. Lardy would use his network of informants and his knack for creating chaos to plant seeds of doubt and scandal. He would fabricate stories, perhaps even evidence, that would paint Bola in the worst possible light. Maybe a fabricated affair, or whispers of embezzlement, something that would make Jonathan question everything he thought he knew about Bola. As Faith hung up the phone, she stood by the window, watching the city lights below, her reflection in the glass showing a woman transformed by revenge. She imagined the fallout, the tears, the broken trust. She could almost taste the victory, the reclaiming of what she considered rightfully hers. This was more than just jealousy. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her place, and her man. But at what cost? Only time would tell, but for now, Faith was consumed by the thrill of the unseen threat she was about to unleash. Lardy and Faith shared a bond that went beyond friendship. It was rooted in mutual envy of Bola. Faith, who had always played the part of Bola's best friend, harbored a deep-seated resentment. She watched from the shadows as Jonathan treated Bola with a love and respect she herself had never known or felt she deserved. This love, which seemed to glow in Jonathan's eyes whenever he looked at Bola, was like a personal affront to Faith, who had always sought a similar adoration from the men in her life but found only superficial affection. With this in mind, Faith sought out Lardy, whose reputation for manipulation was well known. Lardy was the architect of deceit, an artisan of illusion, capable of crafting stories from thin air that could bend reality to his will. Together, they plotted a downfall for Bola so intricate and damaging that it would leave no room for redemption. Their scheme was a masterpiece of treachery. Lardy, with his connections and skills in forgery, created a trail of digital breadcrumbs. He fabricated messages, photos, and even voice recordings, all pointing to Bola having an affair. The evidence was so convincing, so meticulously detailed, that even someone like Jonathan, who had once vowed Bola was the love of his life, would find it hard to dismiss. Faith, for her part, played her role with chilling precision. She approached Jonathan with feigned concern, her eyes shimmering with what appeared to be genuine worry. "Jonathan, I need to show you something," she said, her voice breaking as she handed over the proof. She had rehearsed this moment, her tears a performance worthy of an award. "I never wanted you to find out like this, but she's been lying to you." When Jonathan saw the evidence, his heart felt as though it had been ripped from his chest. "Bola, how could you?" he managed, his voice a mix of agony and betrayal. Bola, confronted with this unexpected nightmare, stood in shock, her voice trembling as she denied the accusations. "Jonathan, this isn't true. I would never do that to you. Please, you have to believe me," she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear and hurt. But the damage was done. Jonathan, overwhelmed by the illusion of betrayal, could only see the lies that had been so carefully laid out before him. "I trusted you," he said, his tone icy, a stark contrast to the warmth that once filled his words. Without another glance, he turned and walked away, leaving Bola to collapse under the weight of her heartbreak. Faith watched from a distance, her lips curving into a satisfied smile. Her plan had worked flawlessly. Bola was no longer in the picture, her reputation in ruins. Now, with Bola out of the way, Faith could step in, playing the part of the sympathetic friend who had been there all along, ready to comfort Jonathan in his time of need. But even as she celebrated her victory, she couldn't shake off the feeling of the cold, calculating revenge she had just enacted. Faith didn't linger on her victory. She struck while the iron was hot. She appeared at Jonathan's door the very next day, a picture of concern with eyes that feigned empathy. "Jonathan, I know you're hurting, but I'm here for you," she whispered, her voice soft and soothing as she placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Jonathan, his world recently shattered, was in no state to push away the warmth of another human. His eyes, tired from nights of no sleep, looked up at Faith with a mixture of gratitude and despair. He allowed her in, not just into his apartment but into the shattered spaces of his heart that Bola's supposed betrayal had left behind. Faith was quick to capitalize on his vulnerability. She became his shadow, appearing with meals he didn't have the heart to cook, cleaning up the mess that his life had become, and filling the silence with her chatter. She played the part of the perfect friend, the one who cared without expecting anything in return, all the while laying the groundwork for her own desires. Days turned into weeks, and Faith's presence became a constant in Jonathan's life. What started as simple companionship morphed into something more intimate. She was there when he needed to talk, when he needed to cry, and eventually, when he needed to feel something other than pain. Faith moved from the couch to his bed, her arms around him offering solace that turned into something dangerously close to love. To those who knew them, it looked like Jonathan had found a new beginning, perhaps even love again. Faith was seen at his side at social gatherings, her laugh mingling with his, her touch always finding a reason to linger. She was crafting a narrative of healing and moving on, painting a picture of a love reborn from the ashes of betrayal. But beneath this facade, Jonathan was in turmoil. Despite Faith's efforts, there was a part of him that remained untouched, a piece that still whispered Bola's name in the quiet moments. He couldn't escape the memories, the love they shared, which felt realer than anything he was experiencing now. No matter how much Faith tried to fill the void, the echo of Bola's laughter, the warmth of her smile, haunted him. Even as he lay next to Faith, feeling her breath against his skin, Jonathan's heart was elsewhere. He tried to convince himself this was moving on, that this was what healing looked like. But the truth was, the love he had for Bola wasn't something that could be easily replaced or forgotten. The comfort Faith offered was laced with deception, and deep down, Jonathan felt the unease of living in a reality that wasn't entirely his own. Faith thought she had one, basking in the illusion of victory. She had Jonathan by her side, at least physically, but his heart was another matter entirely. His behavior was distant. His eyes never held the spark of love when they met hers. No matter how she dressed, how she cooked his favorite meals, or how she whispered sweet nothings, she couldn't replicate the connection he had with Bola. One quiet afternoon, while Faith was out, Jonathan found himself lost in nostalgia, scrolling through the gallery of his phone. There, amidst the sea of memories, he stumbled upon a video Bola had sent him. Her laughter, unguarded and joyful, filled the room, her voice a balm to his wounded soul. It was a reminder of what they had, what he believed they'd lost. Watching it, his heart ached with a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the fallout. This moment of clarity triggered something within him. Doubts about Bola's supposed betrayal began to claw their way back to the surface. The evidence had been too perfect, too convenient. Could he have been so blind? Driven by this gnawing suspicion, Jonathan decided to seek the truth. He reached out to a mutual friend, someone who had kept an ear to the ground in their social circle. They agreed to meet discreetly in a quiet cafe, far from prying eyes. "Tell me everything you know," Jonathan urged, his voice tense with anticipation. His friend hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a hushed tone. Ladi's been talking, Jonathan. He's been bragging about how he and Faith pulled off the whole thing. They set Bola up. A wave of emotions crashed over Jonathan: anger, betrayal, disbelief. His blood boiled with the realization of how easily he had been manipulated. The story Ladi and Faith had crafted was a lie, a cruel deception designed to tear him and Bola apart. He felt like a fool, his heart racing with the need for justice, for retribution. Faith had not only invaded his life but had also destroyed something pure and real. The love he thought he was mourning had been sabotaged by the woman he had let into his home, into his bed. With this new knowledge, Jonathan's resolve hardened. He was no longer the heartbroken man who needed comforting. He was now a man wronged, seeking to right the wrongs done to him and Bola. The truth was out, and he was determined to confront Faith, to expose her deceit, and perhaps, if there was still time, to win back the woman who had truly loved him. Jonathan couldn't keep the truth bottled up inside him. The moment he stepped into his home, the confrontation was inevitable. He found Faith lounging in his living room, acting as if everything was normal, as if she hadn't just torn his life apart with her lies. "You lied to me," he spat out, the words laced with a venomous rage he had never felt before. His voice was loud, echoing through the space that had once been filled with laughter and love. Faith's face drained of color, her mask of serenity slipping. She scrambled for words, her composure faltering. "Jonathan, don't listen to them. They're just trying to ruin what we have," she pleaded, her voice cracking with feigned indignation. But Jonathan's eyes were windows to his fury, and he wasn't falling for her act anymore. "You and Ladi framed Bola," he accused, each word sharp as a blade. "You ruined everything." Faith reached out, her hands desperate to hold on to him, to salvage what she could from this wreckage. But Jonathan, his heart now filled with disgust rather than love, shoved her away with a force born of betrayal. "Get out of my house," he ordered, his voice cold and final. The air between them thickened with the weight of his words. Faith stood there, her world collapsing around her. She had always been good at playing roles, but now, with her victory slipping away, she felt the true sting of defeat. Her eyes darted around, looking for something, anything, that could salvage this situation, but she found nothing. As she gathered her things, her mind raced. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She wasn't supposed to lose. But if she couldn't have Jonathan, she wasn't about to let Bola have him either. Her mind, twisted by jealousy and spite, began to plot once more. If she couldn't win with love, she would ensure that no one else could either. She left Jonathan's house with her dignity in tatters, but her resolve was as strong as ever. She needed a new plan, something more destructive, something that would ensure both Jonathan and Bola would suffer. As she walked away, her steps were heavy with the burden of her next scheme, her mind already calculating, already planning. Faith knew the battle was far from over. She might have lost this round, but she was determined to fight dirty, to play the long game. If she couldn't have love, she would settle for revenge, and she would make sure that Bola and Jonathan would never find peace with each other again. With her plan with Ladi unraveling, Faith knew she needed something more potent, something that would strike fear into the hearts of those who dared to be happy at her expense. Ladi's methods were clever but not enough. She needed a force that was both brutal and untraceable. She contacted Pablo, a name whispered in fear on the streets, known for his violent tendencies and his ability to make people disappear without a trace. Meeting him in a shadowy, run-down bar, she laid out her darkest intentions. "I want her gone," Faith said, her voice as cold as the night air outside. "Make it look like an accident, but make sure she suffers." Pablo, a man with scars that spoke of his life's battles, smirked, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "That'll cost you," he stated, his tone one that brooked no argument. Without hesitation, Faith pulled out an envelope stuffed with cash, handing over half of the payment. "The rest when it's done," she promised, her voice steady, her eyes devoid of the warmth they once had. Pablo counted the money, nodding his head in satisfaction. "Consider it done," he said, sealing Bola's fate with those 3 words. Faith left the bar with a chilling calm. She had crossed a line into a territory from which there was no return, but she felt no remorse. If love had failed her, if manipulation had not been enough, then violence would be her final card. She was determined to ensure that no one else could bask in the happiness she felt denied. As she walked away, the night seemed to close around her, the darkness a fitting companion to her soul. She had made a deal with the devil of the streets, and now, the wheels of her most sinister plot were in motion. Bola's life, unbeknownst to her, was now in the crosshairs of one of the city's most feared enforcers. Faith knew this was the endgame. She had escalated beyond her previous schemes, and now, with Pablo involved, there was no turning back. The streets would soon see if her heart, now hardened by vengeance, could truly win what she believed was hers by right. Bola had been painstakingly stitching her life back together, thread by thread. After Jonathan's betrayal, she had built walls around her heart, ignoring his attempts to reconnect, still wounded by the accusations that had shattered their trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the streets, Bola left a small shop where she had been buying essentials. Her mind was on her next steps, her future without the love she thought was her cornerstone. Suddenly, a hooded figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a purpose that chilled Bola to the bone. Before she could react, something was hurled at her face, a liquid that felt like fire upon contact. The pain was excruciating, immediate, and it tore a scream from her throat. Acid, vicious and burning, had been thrown at her. By some stroke of fate or quick reflex, most of the acid missed her, but a small amount landed on her cheek, leaving a searing, painful burn. The attacker, their face obscured by the hood, didn't linger. They vanished into the night like a specter, leaving chaos in their wake. Bola collapsed to the ground, her hands instinctively covering her face, the pain like nothing she had ever known. Passers-by, drawn by her screams, rushed to her side. A woman quickly called for an ambulance while others tried to comfort Bola, offering water to dilute the acid. "Hold on, help is coming," one of them urged, his voice a mix of panic and compassion. Bola's world was a blur of pain and fear. She could feel the burn, hear her own ragged breaths, and the distant sirens that promised aid. The shock of the attack, the betrayal of being targeted in such a vicious manner, began to sink in. Who could hate her so much to do this? As she was loaded into the ambulance, her thoughts, despite the agony, turned to Faith. Could her former friend have stooped to this level? The thought was terrifying, the implications horrifying. But there was no time for reflection. The burn needed urgent attention. The incident would leave scars, not just on her skin but on her soul. Bola was beginning to understand that her battle wasn't just with her past or with mending her broken heart. It was now for her very survival in a world she thought she understood. The attack was a brutal reminder that some battles were fought in the darkness, by enemies cloaked not just in hoods, but in the shadows of former friendships. The news of the attack reached Jonathan like a physical blow. He raced to the hospital, his heart pounding with a mix of fear, guilt, and a desperate need for redemption. The sterile smell of the hospital did nothing to calm his nerves as he searched for Bola's room. When he finally found her, the sight of her bandaged face was like a knife twisting in his gut. Bola's eyes, filled with pain yet still carrying a spark of resilience, met his. Her face was obscured, but the hurt in her gaze was unmistakable. "I'm so sorry, Bola. I failed you," Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking as tears welled up in his eyes. He felt the weight of his mistakes, the trust he had so wrongly broken, now compounded by the violence she had endured. Bola, even in her weakened state, could see the genuine remorse in his expression, the pain in his voice. Despite the betrayal, the hurt, and now this physical attack, she felt a softening towards him. "I don't blame you, Jonathan," she managed to say, her voice weak but steady. In that moment, the barriers she had erected around her heart began to crumble. Jonathan took her hand gently, careful not to cause her any more pain. "I swear, I won't leave your side again," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. The realization that this attack was likely orchestrated by Faith fueled his resolve. He would protect Bola, he would be there for her, and he would make sure that Faith faced the consequences of her actions. His mind raced with plans, but first, he needed to focus on Bola. He stayed with her, holding her hand, talking in soothing tones about anything but the attack, trying to bring some comfort to her pain. The nurses came and went, treating her burns, but Jonathan's presence was a constant, a silent promise of his newfound commitment. As the night deepened, and Bola drifted in and out of sleep, Jonathan's thoughts were clear. Faith had gone too far, and this was more than just a personal vendetta now. It was criminal. He would gather evidence, talk to witnesses, and do whatever it took to ensure justice was served. His love for Bola, once clouded by deceit, was now a beacon of clarity, guiding him towards redemption and retribution. The hospital room, with its beeping machines and the soft glow of the nightlight, became a place not just of healing for Bola's physical wounds, but also for the healing of their relationship. Jonathan knew the road ahead would be long, but he was ready to walk it with Bola, together against whatever darkness Faith might still try to cast upon them. Jonathan didn't hesitate. With a heart full of determination and a mind set on justice, he went straight to the police. He detailed everything: Faith's manipulation, the setup with Ladi, and the recent attack on Bola. But when the police went to arrest Faith, they found her apartment empty, her belongings scattered like she had left in a hurry. She had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, Pablo, left unpaid and with his reputation on the line, was livid. He had been betrayed, and in his world, that was an unforgivable sin. He started his own manhunt, using every contact and informant at his disposal to track down Faith. His messages to her were relentless, each one a chilling reminder of his intent. "You can't run forever, Faith." His voice boomed through a voice note sent to her phone, the tone dark and menacing. "You owe me. And I always collect." Faith was no longer the orchestrator of schemes. She was now the quarry, constantly on the move, her once lavish life reduced to cheap motels and back alleys. She had money, but it was dwindling fast. Her beauty, which had once been her currency, was now a liability, making her too recognizable. Sleep was a luxury she could no longer afford, with every shadow a potential threat. She changed her appearance, cut her hair, and used disguises, but Pablo's network was vast and efficient. His threats grew louder, his presence seemed to loom closer with each passing day. She moved from city to city, always looking over her shoulder, her heart racing at every loud noise or unfamiliar face. The predator, so used to controlling the game, was now the prey, chased by the very violence she had once thought to wield. Faith was learning the hard lesson that betrayal begets betrayal, and in the underworld, debts were settled in blood or worse. Her nights were filled with fear, her days with paranoia. She knew Pablo would not stop until he found her, and the thought of what he would do when he did was terrifying. Her mind, once so sharp in plotting against others, was now consumed with survival. She had resources, but no allies, no one to trust. The tables had turned. From a life where she manipulated others, she now had to navigate a world where everyone was a potential enemy. The hunt for Faith was on, with both the law and the lawless closing in. She had unleashed a storm, and now she was caught in the eye of it, with nowhere to hide and no one to turn to. The predator had indeed become the prey, and the chase was far from over. Bola, having endured so much, made a conscious decision not to let the darkness of her experiences overshadow her life. With Jonathan's steadfast support, she embarked on a journey of healing. The physical scars from the acid attack faded with time and treatment, but the emotional wounds required a different kind of care, love, patience, and understanding, which Jonathan provided in abundance. One evening, under a sky painted with the hues of sunset, Jonathan took Bola's hands in his eyes reflecting a world of sincerity and love. He got down on one knee, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Bola, you are my home," he said. "I want to spend the rest of my life making things right, loving you, protecting you. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy, mixed with relief and love, streamed down Bola's face. Despite everything, here was the man she loved, asking for a second chance, not just to love but to make amends for the past. She nodded, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Jonathan. Yes. Their wedding was nothing short of a spectacle, a celebration that seemed to echo across the community. It was more than just a union. It was a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the undying power of love to overcome even the darkest of times. Friends, family, and even those who had followed their story from afar gathered to witness this moment of triumph. The ceremony was filled with laughter, tears, and the kind of joy that only comes from overcoming adversity together. They danced under a canopy of stars, surrounded by lanterns that lit up the night, each one symbolizing hope, love, and the light that had guided them back to each other. Faith was a shadow that no longer loomed over them. She had disappeared, and with time, her memory faded into a cautionary tale of what happens when one allows jealousy and revenge to consume them. The focus was now on healing, on building a future together. As they exchanged vows, it was clear to all that this love had been tested in the fires of betrayal and pain but had emerged stronger, more beautiful. Jonathan and Bola's story became one of those rare narratives where love, against all odds, not only survived but thrived, proving that sometimes the greatest victories are those won in the heart. Hand in hand, Jonathan and Bola stepped onto the plane bound for Canada, their hearts lighter than they had been in months. They were embarking on a new chapter, one filled with promise and the sweet relief of leaving behind the shadows of their past. As the aircraft ascended, piercing through the clouds, Bola squeezed Jonathan's hand. With a smile that reached her eyes, she whispered, "We made it." In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the airplane and the anticipation of a new life, Bola felt a profound sense of freedom. The weight of betrayal, the sting of attack, all seemed to melt away with the increasing distance from the ground. They were free to love, to heal, to build anew. Meanwhile, Faith's existence had devolved into one of constant fear and evasion. She lived like a fugitive, moving from one seedy motel to another, from dark alley to hidden corner, always on the lookout for Pablo. The life she had so greedily pursued, filled with luxury and manipulation, had crumbled, leaving her in a perpetual state of flight. Her nights were sleepless, her days spent in paranoia, knowing that Pablo, with his relentless pursuit, was never far behind. Her once vibrant world had shrunk to the size of her hiding spots, her beauty now a mask she used to disappear rather than attract. The very tools she had used to control others were now her undoing. The life she chased, thinking it would bring her happiness, had instead led her to ruin. As Bola and Jonathan looked forward to their new beginning, Faith was a stark contrast, living in the remnants of her own destruction. She had lost everything in her quest for what she thought was rightfully hers, while Bola and Jonathan's love had not only survived but had grown stronger, a beacon of hope against the stormiest of seas. The plane flew into the horizon, a symbol of their departure from pain and into a future bright with possibilities. And as the city below faded into a speck, so too did the past, leaving behind only the lessons learned and the strength gained. They were free, finally free, to love without fear, to live without looking back. If you enjoy this story, please consider liking and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments and I will respond to every one of them. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye.